Here is Ben Shapiro. And the interesting thing is that we're told that Sanders has not been vetted properly. And to be fair, in 2012, Mitt Romney ran against Barack Obama because he hadn't been properly vetted either. Barack Obama hadn't. We didn't get to the bottom of Bill Ayers.
We don't really do vetting in this country, actually.
Well, the thing is that like the issue is not vetting. This is the thing I think that people don't understand in this era. The days of a story sinking somebody, that's done, right? The days of like, oh, you had an affair with this person, or you smoked pot, or whatever it was, one incident sinking a campaign is done. What you can get is stories that play into a narrative that has already been established. I mean, that's what happened to Hillary Clinton. Everybody assumed, oh my God, or I shouldn't say everybody assumed, but there was a big assumption that because she had been subjected, and it is the truth, there was no one who was assaulted by, rhetorically assaulted by a political party probably more than Hillary Clinton in the modern era over such a sustained period of time, 30 years, right? Like they had stories that she was a murderess in the 90s.
You wouldn't know anything about that, though.
And I have no idea, but the idea that and the story that people who were big supporters of her told themselves was she has been tested. She has been so vetted. They have gone through with a fine-tooth comb, and nothing has sunk her. And she has and as such, she has built up an armor of steel. But what was misunderstood at that time, I think, was that what has been created is a pre-existing narrative. Doesn't matter if it's true or false. It doesn't matter. Put that aside. That a narrative that has stuck to her. And so any tiny new piece of information that will come out, if it fed into that narrative, if it was in any way being able to be twisted or organically fed into that narrative, it assumed the power of that narrative. So when Comey does that letter and reverses it, that would have done nothing to any other candidate, I think. But because there was so much else reservoir that it tapped into that power of that narrative. And again, she won by a razor thin margin. The thing that they have not been able to do with Sanders is to develop this narrative. Now, for whatever reason, maybe because Hillary didn't want to damage him, maybe whatever you want to say, and I think we could talk for half an hour as to why they haven't been able to do that narrative. That's why, like Chris Matthews says, like he's the type of guy who's not going to stop his car when you're lying by the road. It seems completely bizarre. Like there's nothing that anybody has ever said about Bernie Sanders that fits in with that narrative. And the one thing that we're told is like they're going to hammer him with being a socialist and a communist. But the problem is that these terms do not have the resonance that they would have 20 years ago. In fact, I will say this, that the Soviet Union fell. I was just talking today about like what when I was my son's age, who's 6, the Holocaust was closer in time than the fall of the Soviet Union to me, than the fall of the Soviet Union is to my son who's 6 now. And I can tell you that the idea of the Holocaust resonating, with people who were 20, in 1972 was still, this does not have the resonance that they think it does. And that's the fall of the Soviet Union rather than like the heart of the Cold War, which was 20 years earlier than that. Like I did not grow up putting my head under a desk because I thought we were going to get into a nuclear confrontation with the Soviets.
Yeah, and you're super old.
And I'm old. Honestly. And so when Ben Shapiro tries to build this narrative, they're going to try this on the right, but it's going to be like talking about Chicago-style politics. it's just going to be like, what? Deep dish pizza? I don't get it. And here he is. And, part of the problem is like, this is how twisted that they have to get to even build this narrative, and they're just not getting anywhere.
That is Bernie Sanders' agenda. Free everything, paid for presumably by the rich, but the rich don't have the kind of money to pay for $60 trillion worth of spending on what he is talking about.
All right, pause it. Let me just say that whole spending thing, they blew that up themselves. 5 years ago, Republicans were pretending like they cared about the deficit and spending and this and that. We're going to hit Weimar Germany. They're not going to be able to turn the ship around right now because Donald Trump has the biggest deficit that we have ever experienced and the biggest debt load. I don't necessarily think it's necessarily a problem, but that rhetorically is just not going to sell.
On what he is talking about. And you can tell what is really animating the Sanders campaign has nothing to do with his plans, has nothing to do with his spending, has nothing to do with where he wants the country to go. What really is animating Bernie Sanders' campaign is hatred for all that is. It's hatred for the quote-unquote status quo.
Pause it.
And his
hatred for the status quo. Who was the last candidate to win on an attack on the status quo? They are sitting in office. Who was the candidate that won before that? That was the one who's saying we can change, hope and change. Every election is a change election. Continue.
Hatred for all that is. It's hatred for the quote-unquote status quo. And his surrogates say this. So Michael Moore is a big Bernie Sanders fan. And he's out there saying that we are like the French resistance. See, it's not what Bernie is for that matters. It's what Bernie is against. Bernie is against capitalism. Bernie is against the American system. Bernie is against American history. Bernie is for a complete overthrow of the American system wholesale. And Michael Moore is totally into it. Here's Michael Moore characterizing Bernie Sanders' opposition as basically Nazi-esque and suggesting that Bernie Sanders is the French resistance, which is an amazing statement.
All right, pause it now. Now, he just screwed up. He didn't order this diatribe properly because first he says like he's the French resistance, which proves my point that he's against the status quo, which means he's against America and capitalism, but that's not what the French resistance actually worked with America. The French resistance was fighting against the Nazis. And then he realizes, oh, wait, I should have said that earlier and then extrapolated, but he didn't. He got confused.
Bernie Sanders' opposition is basically Nazi-esque and suggesting that Bernie Sanders is the French resistance, which is an amazing statement given the fact that Bernie Sanders, during World War II, if he had been a politically active man at that time, would have been on the side of the USSR, which at the beginning was at least on the side of the Nazis. In any case, that's not to say Bernie Sanders is a Nazi. The point is that to characterize Bernie Sanders' opposition as Nazi-esque and Bernie as a French resistance member is ridiculous on his face.
So if I understand the argument here, that because Bernie Sanders is a democratic socialist, which incidentally, France, democratic socialists. But because he's a democratic socialist, he wouldn't be with the French resistance. He would be with the Soviet Union, which incidentally was allied at the beginning with the Nazis. But which is not to say that Bernie Sanders is a Nazi. I guess it's to say that he would be allied with the Nazis until, of course, that they became so the idea is this. It's like what the narrative they're going to try and build is that it is the idea that Bernie Sanders would be fighting on the Western front against the Nazis is absurd. He would be fighting on the Eastern front of Nazis against the Nazis, which is exactly why you should vote against him.
Makes sense to me.
There you go.
Yeah, Ben, you want to get into where my position on Stalin-Ribbentrop would have been?
But this is why they are. I think this is why Donald Trump knows there's a little bit of a problem. I think he's a crazy guy. I think Donald Trump is nuts. I think he's not super bright. But what he does know, right? But what he does know, I think is also a hot take, is marketing. And I think he knows you can't get up there and say he wants to give you free everything.
Yeah, he has a certain low cunning for sure.
Yeah, I think it's almost like animalistic in terms of what he thinks is going to. His assessments of everything I think are wrong in that respect. It's just I think that like he knows, what am I going to say to the guy? Like he's going to give you everything for free and I'm going to be the responsible one and make you pay. And I think, there's this notion that he's going to, and we'll talk about this tomorrow when we talk about the David Frum piece, he's going to be assaulted by all of these things saying that, he's going to raise your taxes and et cetera, et cetera. But the thing is that it's always the cover up. And within American sort of like the narrative that sunk Hillary Clinton was that there was a secret agenda. The narrative they tried to sink Barack Obama with was there's a secret agenda. Heirs and this, and it's always that. And the problem they have with Sanders in developing this agenda is that he admits it. He doesn't, he just comes out and admits it. And this is going to be very difficult for them to operate on, and like honestly, the best argument that people have against Sanders, I don't subscribe to it, but I think the only one that that could be effective in the Democratic primary is that this perception that in fact there are ideological lanes that are as clear as people think that they are, or suspect that they are, and that he can't win because of it. And so he's a risky proposition. But even Ratner gave away the game when he's saying like people are afraid that he could lose, and they're afraid that he could win.
Absolutely.
And so that sort of gives it away because if you're so sure that he's going to lose, then you're not worried about his policies being implemented.